Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight in welcoming poet, performer, playwright, and multimedia artist Sarah Hennessey to Washington State University. My name is Levi Polycarpio, and I am a WSU Visiting Writers Series intern that is currently a fourth year student studying English. I am joining you from the Pullman campus located on the homelands of the Nimipu and the traditional homeland of the Palouse people. We wanted to take time to acknowledge their presence here and to recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. In doing so, we also recognize that land acknowledgements are an important first step in a longer term commitment to responsibly engaging with our WSU land grant mission. Today's event is only possible through the Coup community that continues to persevere, a partnership between the WSU Pullman and Vancouver English departments, WSU's College of Arts and Sciences, Landscapes, Native American programs, WSU Vancouver's Council on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Academic Outreach and Innovation, ASWSU, and WSU's Common Reading Program. I also wanted to take time to thank our VWS directors, Karen McGill and Julian Onkney. Thank you all for making the time to be with us this evening. Our common reading book this year was Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, which reflects upon modern-day botany as well as environmentalism through the perspective of Indigenous peoples of North America. Kimmerer offers a necessary perspective of how we can better face the challenges of our changing environment through multiple knowledge bases. Finally, the Visiting Writers Series would like to invite everyone to the final virtual reading of the school year with author and poet C. Marie Furman on April 5th at 6 p.m. Now, I would like to introduce my fellow BWS intern, Maya Alger, to introduce Sarah Hennessey.
Thank you, Levi. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Maya Alger, as Levi said, and I am also an intern for the Visiting Writers Series. Tonight at WSU, we have the opportunity to share the work of Sarah Hennessey, a profound multimedia and literary artist. Traditionally, the work of our Visiting Writers Series connects to our current common reading book. This year's selection is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Sarah Hennessey's poetry highlights the importance of Native language reconciliation and representation, uniting Indigenous culture with society at large. Sarah Hennessey is Nimipu, a Nez Perce poet, performer, playwright, multimedia fiber artist, and youth empowerment theater practitioner. Her work highlights the symbiosis of storytelling and language reclamation. Her work embodies language revitalization as target revitalization through creativity. By integrating her penchant for literature and performance into her educational outreach, Hennessey infuses her instruction with interdisciplinary pedagogy and both traditional and contemporary storytelling techniques. Hennessey has been published in literary journals such as Yellow Medicine Review, Paper Dragon, and Pork Belly Press. Her first short play, Not My Grandmother's Coyote, was featured in Lewis Clark State College's Humanifest in spring of 2021. Hennessey is a Fish Trap Fellow this spring 2023. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight as we honor culture and community through the guidance of literature. Without further ado, everyone please give a warm WSU welcome to Sarah Hennessey.
Oh, Katsiao, thank you. And I'm going to be looking up above the camera because I'm here live in the classroom, and so I have a small private audience. And so just to let you know where my eyeline is going, I am so grateful and humbled to be here. And I will probably be tearing up quite a bit, very emotional. I'm deeply proud of the work that I've been invited to share with you all, and I'm so grateful to Julian. She's my sister, and she just is a powerhouse, let me tell you. And so I'm going to share some of my poetry and talk a little bit about the plays that have been born of that poetry. And I just want to take a moment to thank, of course, Julian and WSU. I also want to thank my family, in Lautiwama, all my friends, ka oi kalos na pitemana wat, all of my teachers. There are so many people who have built up to this moment that I just am, like I said, I'm grateful and humbled by how much love and support I've received. And so I'll share a little bit about each piece as I go through, and yeah, and I want to thank you all for being here. I'm really, again, I just am thrilled to be able to share art with the world. So my very first piece is actually about the first time I came to the WSU Vancouver campus with my dear sister, Julian. It is a poem. It's called Ode to a Pumpkin Bunt. I wanted to start off on a little bit of a lighthearted note. And I also had the opportunity to record this poem to play on the Ketchikan local radio during Poetry Month. And I want to give a special shout out to my dear friend, Frances, for extending that opportunity to me. So without further ado, my first poem, Ode to a Pumpkin Bunt. Small, dense spice. When we first meet, it seems disjointed, small, dense, spice. The word I use is cloying. I sip the coffee they paid better attention to. Small, dense spice, your drizzle is decorative and I am sullen or angry. The review that I offer is missed opportunity. But your small, dense spice self dives into a paper sleeve and tumbles in a bag. Litter, we think. What a waste, but we laugh. And as we climb and wander, we are losing ourselves in short, curt breaths. And we are watering ourselves in cold splashes between huffs. You, once small, now large. Once dense, now generous in thickness. At once you are spice, delicate, but verbose. We turn to you, small, dense spice. We revisit our hubris and find ourselves humbled, not only by hunger, but by bearing witness to potential fulfilled. We are new now, Pumpkin Bunt. We are new, and you are our newness. Oh, Pumpkin Bunt, you splendid underdog, I am indebted to you. I really like writing poetry that's lighthearted, and I like to be earnest in being lighthearted. I like to incorporate elements of humor, and I like to highlight sort of the unexpected delights that I come across. And so that was one that was, as you know, I said, was motivated by a pumpkin bunt that we at first laughed and thought, no way, but then eventually we devoured it after a long hike. And that was the only bit of food in the entire car. So we were quite impressed with the pumpkin bunt afterwards. But now I will move into a little bit more of a serious piece. And this is a piece that I wrote for the Tupelo Press 3030. They invite poets to write a poem a day for a full month. And once again, I did this with, again, my dear friend Frances. We both wrote poems once a day for a full month. And this was actually, no, I think it was day 2. I was going to say it was day 1, but that's a little optimistic. But it's called Lesson 1. And this is dedicated to, one of my Sepheteminate Wat, one of my takas, who's passed, Bessie, and then also Pinots or Florine. Those were the elders who attended my Nez language class in college, and they were part of, an integral part of that class. And then it's also dedicated to Professor Harold Crook and to Angel Sabota, because they were, 2 of my other primary Nez Perce language instructors. So this is called Lesson 1. Nez Perce language is Nimi Putimpt. My mouth sometimes malforms Nimi Putimpt. Sometimes my hands do it too. There's extra vowels and misplaced stresses, ignored glottal stops, and the hard consonants that I can't find on the keyboard, and so often can't find in my own throat, unless I'm alone, repeating, Kots, Kots, Kots. Cults. I think of my elders in Idaho. Bessie's sharp no makes me jump, but her smile always soothes me. And Florine's measured pronunciation, a soft but resonant alto, comes to me, sings me the words, and tells me, you'll remember, because there's so much we refused to forget. Just gonna take a breath there and just relish in the love that I have for my elders. Yeah, I'm trying to keep from sobbing. My work is, is obviously deeply personal to me. And the next piece is actually sort of a cornerstone. It's a little bit of a keystone in my portfolio. It's a poem that I wrote based off of the coyote stories. The Nez Perce traditional stories center, one of the center figures is Coyote, and he's a trickster. And so as I went through college and I had the privilege of being in Nez Perce language class and just in and of the community, I was learning all these stories. And so as a writer, I wanted to try to approach Coyote myself and try to write into that theme. And so this piece started off as a 4-part poem that was published in the Pork Belly Press. And it was one of my first paper publications, which if anybody is a writer, that now there's a pretty big gap between digital publication and print publication. So this was my first in print. And it eventually turned into a portion of my play, my short play, Watu Nakatsum Itsiyaya, which is Not My Grandmother's Coyote. This poem features in several portions of that play. And so it's called Self-Portrait as Postmodern Coyote in 4 parts. 1. Coyote sometimes feels feathers in place of fur on his shoulders. Swears he feels a weight, long but light, lay across his body, his tail. Coyote wakes from the flutter of falling, certain that his wings have dropped him. Fox tells Coyote there's nothing on his back. No bare spots? No. No feathers? No. Just fur. Coyote never knows when his wings will come to him, nor when they'll leave again. He considers flight a gift, but its sudden retreat a test of patience and resolve. The dulcet tones of meadowlark call to mind whispers of ancestors. Coyote cries to think he flies only when he dreams of dying. 2. Coyote was sleeping when the wildfire started, so he couldn't be sure if he'd started it. Had the fur on his paws and tail always been tinged with black? Coyote cupped water and marched to the nearest embers, only when he got there, he was so thirsty he lapped up the water and tasted the soot ground into his fur. 3. Coyote can't conjure confidence enough to know his own reflection. When he looks, it gives him fox ears or wolf snout, palms and fingertips where paw pads were. His rump feels bare, but his tail taps his leg, light but fast. Coyote in the night forgets the color of his fur and upon waking bites his tail, sure it is a stranger. He yelps, bares his teeth. The stranger is hostile. He bites again. Coyote watches his feet as he walks. Not sure they will stay on this earth. Not sure he will recognize them as they march on stars, singeing and dancing through asteroid belts to reach the far-flung heaven his ancestors hide in. 4. Coyote swears as he swims that his toes grow webs, that his belly becomes ensconced in scales. Coyote can almost feel his neck open, gills gaping and fluttering. Though not frightened of the water, Coyote loathes the cloying cold. He always imagines it will numb his limbs, and having frozen, he'll join the journey upstream, and then he'll spawn a new generation. When Coyote reaches instinctively toward the shore, he's shocked by the leanness of his arm, the fur soaked and still matted like scales. Coyote knows he feels webbing in his toes, even as he ambulates over the ridge, away from the riverbank. Coyote can't catch his breath as he climbs the crest overlooking the river valley. He can only writhe in the dirt. He can only gaze with gaping eyes, gasp as Eagle collects him. Coyote cannot account for the way his mouth wavers in silent pose. Is it fear or loss of breath? Waking to a song, Coyote could swear it was his own voice. He finds himself perched upon the back of Eagle, wings wide. And so actually in this next piece, the next piece turned into the other half of, or somewhat the other half of my first short play. I challenged myself to try to use as much Nez Perce language as I could without looking anything up. And so as I wrote this poem, I was going through and trying to just push myself to really reach back into my language classes and really just try, it was an experiment to just test myself. And eventually I merged the previous poem with the one I'm about to read. And there's a little bit of, seaming it together, but ultimately they became my first short play. And so this one is entitled Timnapa, which means in the heart. Timnapa. It started in the heart, my love and my voice. And aren't they the same thing? Don't they echo familial whispers? Timnapa. I am the precursor, Timnapa. I am the breath you take before you ask your name, Timnapa. I am the heart where the blood started, pumped from mother to child, child to mother, Timnapa. I am and I will be. Timnapa. It started in the heart's first electric pulse. Timnapa. I am and I will be. Timnapa. Manawetnikisa. Itu what's it hiwitsa. Kumoya. Wixsali. Ahatuisa kunku. Wakunku. I am the occupation. I am the bullet burrowed in a chest wall. Isn't that why it hurts so much to look me in the eye? Isn't that why their tongues can't slide through words, can't find their place in the cannon barrel of their mouths? Timnapa, that first place they felt it. I am not their atonement because their sins were birthed from their bodies and into the world screaming, Manawetnikisa. Metu, itu what's it hiwitsa. Kumoya. Wixsali. Ahatuisa kunku wakunku. I am the aftermath. I am born of blood and earth, joy and sunrise. I am and I will be. Timnapa, where it started, the love that brought me to life. Timnapa, where my name was born. The song sang to me to keep me strong. Timnapa. Wixsali. Titokatikta etka witzasa titokan etka witzasich. And in the play version of this poem, I did a little more to translate some of the language. And so I'll take a moment now because I feel like, it's poignant to the piece. So the portion that says Manawetnikisa, that is, what is your name? And the refrain of sorts is Itu what's it hiwitsa, for what reason are you crying? Kumoya, come here. Wixalich, sit down. And of course, the sort of pivotal line, Ahatuasa kunku wach kunku. That is, I love you always and always. And so in this piece, I really wanted to buffer that core, the angrier part that's sort of in the middle. I wanted to buffer it with so much more of the love and compassion that that I just have been raised with, and that I experienced not just through my family, but also through my community and through all of the beautiful love and support that brought me here today. And so that is sort of a theme throughout a lot of my work, is that I try my best to balance things, because I don't want to lean too deeply into, whether it's just negativity or whether it's trauma and things like that. I always want to try to bring that love and bring that grace and gratitude that I've been raised with. And so I wanted that refrain of not just Tim Napa, in the heart, but also that refrain of, why are you crying? Come here, sit down. I love you always and always. And so, yeah, the version that ended up in that short play was a little more expanded. And actually, I want to give a quick shout out to my dramaturg of sorts, only kind of on the first play. He was my co-star and dramaturg and producer or something. I mean, he's just got a list of credits. Roland Wiaskis. And that portion at the end of this poem, Wixalich, Titokatzikza etka witzasa titokan, etza etka witzasich. That portion is, sit down. I speak the people's language, Titokatzikza, etka witzasa titokan, because I become a person. And that's sort of based in an ideology that was introduced to me by a dear mentor and kin, Phil Cash. And actually Inez too, Inez Avila Hernandez, there was a conversation that I had the privilege to be part of where we were talking about health and healing, and this idea of healing is a sort of, you're becoming a person, you're becoming a real person. And it's a long and complicated sort of, well, it's actually not that complicated, but it's this really lovely idea that was woven together by Phil and Inez. And so, special shout out to them because I just continue to become a person and become a better person through knowing them and through hearing those discussions and hearing that traditional knowledge. So those two pieces kind of came together to create that first short play. And I have that first short play as well as my second short play, which is currently I'm on my way to Lewiston, Idaho next week to direct my second short play. And so we'll actually be staging it and producing it. And it's just dream come true, like completely surreal. And so these two short plays eventually will come together to formulate a one-person show, I believe, or maybe just a full-blown production. I'm kind of being a little modest and a little bit cautious by saying one-person show, but that is also a goal I set out for myself. And so it was difficult to bring, the second short play into the mix for this particular event, because it does have multiple roles and voices, and so I just wasn't sure how I was going to be able to represent that. But I will actually take a moment just to speak to it a little bit. It's the second short play I wrote as a love letter to myself. I am somebody who, can be a fairly anxious person. And so I've been really trying to strengthen the tools that I use to be able to, navigate that anxiety. And so this short play was so much about caring for myself, even in those times, even in those thoughts, even in darkness, wanting to care for myself, see anger or see sadness or see worry and say, it's okay, like you're valid. That's a valid experience. You know, those are valid thoughts and feelings, but they don't get to run the show, right? They don't get to be the only voice speaking. And so the core of the play is all about how the heart comes through and how love and kindness can guide the discussion. And so accepting the anger or sadness or worry, and giving it space, and accepting and validating it, and then also being able to move past the way that it can be overwhelming. And so that was a really, like, just a really poignant thing for me to do for myself. And then all of a sudden people were like, oh, I'd love to read it. And I was like, oh, it's almost like reading my diary. But I got brave and I sent it out. And, you know, ultimately it came around to now I'm going to go direct this little short play. And I just, my heart is just bursting. I'm so proud of it, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. And so, yeah, I guess I wanted to take a moment just to sort of weave all that together, because the next piece that I want to share is actually one that I find to be, you know, it embodies a lot of these same principles that I've been talking about of wanting to buffer the more serious elements with love and kindness, and acknowledging beauty, acknowledging that beauty and trauma can coexist, and acknowledging that corrosive and even oppressive systems, you know, can be addressed while also acknowledging that they are not the only thing that exist. And so this next piece was a big step for me poetically, because I tended to shy away a little bit from being too serious. You know, I just felt like it was maybe too cliche for poetry to embody like this deep seriousness and brooding anger and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, that's me sometimes, but more often than not, as you might be able to tell from my rainbow sweater and my, you know, I mean, people here in the room with me can see I'm very brightly colored and dressed. And so more often than not, I tend to have a more upbeat presence. So to write just a dour poem didn't feel true to myself. And so this piece, I really pushed and tried to explore that space as a full like unit, to like embrace this beauty and this love, while also then turning and acknowledging the more the darkness that exists, right? And so I speak pretty pointedly to certain parts of that, but I will also just say, this is a work in progress. It's a lengthy piece, and I'm very proud to be, I'm currently a fellow it's called Poetry and the Senses, and it's run through UC Berkeley. And so it's this beautiful group of poets, and we meet and share work, and we're able to have these discussions about craft and about process. And so I shared a portion of this with them, and they gave me some really beautiful feedback. And I haven't gotten to integrate all that feedback quite yet. I made a couple pokes and prods. But then I had the privilege of reading this piece, the full like rough draft of it at Fish Trap this past summer. The writing group that I'm part of, Le Coupe Cime, of which Julian is a part. And we have 5 other members who are all dearly beloved individuals. And we were the keynote speakers at the Fish Trap writing retreat in Wallowa, Oregon. And so this was the piece that I shared. We each, you know, shared a little bit of our work. And so this was the piece that I chose to share. And it's currently going by the title, Hassan Means Breath. And then there's a little E in parentheses because it can also, Hassan means breathe. So I just wanted to clarify that for everybody who's not looking at my screen right now, because that's only me. So, and this actually, again, sort of follows in form with the Timnapa poem, because I like using repetition, especially with Nez Perce language, because that's one of the best ways to learn. And so that's one of the ways that I help teach myself. And that's also one of the ways that I want to help extend this to the audience and really give people the opportunity to understand what I'm saying, because I don't want to gatekeep my language. And I want as many people as possible to be able to access what I'm saying. So I try to use repetition a lot as a language teaching tool. And yeah, so it shows up in this piece as well. So Hassan means breath. Prologue. Hassan. We're here in this liminal space. Hassan. Words as needle. Hassan. Breath as thread. They dart into realities and stitch together lifetimes. Hassan. I welcome weary hearts with hawthorn boughs and water. Hassan. I lay a bed of flowers because I know flowers are timeless. Thusly, they are old friends with good tidings. Hassan. I welcome you here before we both turn back outward. Hassan. As I'm sure you know, it's quite wearisome out there sometimes. Hassan. It can be cruel even. Hassan. But here, let us name flowers. Hassan, so we can be anchored in this moment's peace, this shared space, this liminality, spiritual soil where secrets pull like water. Hassan. Hassan. I offer you clematis. Hassan. It climbs trellises and blooms a holy purple. Hassan, the impossible kind of purple. The kind that can only exist in the chambers of the heart. Hassan, surging red and meat and blood, made live and lovely by the thrum of blue electricity. Hassan, thunderclap purple. Hassan, a heartbeat. Hassan, a moment of pure life. Hassan, cherish the deep, unseen work your body is doing. When you see clematis, Hassan, remember the strike of purple. Hassan, each petal, Hassan, as pristine as the exquisite beat of your heart. Hassan. Chapter 1. Hassan. Take and rename. That's cultural appropriation, baby. Take and rename. Hassan, take and rename and take and rename and take and rename and take. And rename and take. Hassan and rename. Hassan. It's all basic marketing. That's capitalism, baby. Just take and rename and take and rename, and old becomes new. Becomes new, improved, old. It's marketing. Who stands to profit? Hassan. We, the knowledgeable, stand and cry appropriation. Hassan, we earned that knowledge. Hassan, our humanity earned us the right. Hassan, colonizers cry adjudicated tears and take and rename. Hassan, cultural appropriation is colonization. Hassan, it's a tale as old as time immemorial. Tell the story. Hassan, take and rename and nickname the rename. And deny, 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 and distract from the issue. Distraction tactics include, but are not limited to, do your own research, and or pick an amendment to shroud yourself in, and or cite an ancient civilization. Bonus points if it's on the same continent, but merely divided by a colonial border. When all else fails, start slinging mud. Hassan, cultural appropriation is not a casual mistake, it's colonization. Hassan, Hennessey, cultural appropriation is colonization. A seedling of colonization with no place in our soil. Yet colonization drops its toxic little body onto the ground. Hassan, it is nourished by neglect. Hassan, each blind eye and each confrontation avoided sustains the colonizer, motivates them. Hassan, intellectual property theft is a shortcut to profits. And what are profits? That's wage theft, baby. Hassan, it is a system designed well for the very few who win. Hassan, who wins? Who's in? Who dares to speak the name? Hassan, don't champ guilt. Hear the words, Hassan. It's not a mistake. It's colonization. Hassan, whose sin? Who's in? Who wins? Hassan, Hennessey, Hassan, Hassan. Chapter 2. Hassan. Tsikta wet nikt. I speak the name. Capitalism is in bed with cultural appropriation and colonization. Hassan, cultural appropriation is colonization. Hassan, it invalidates origin with possession. Finders keepers. It invalidates possession by undermining humanhood. The most human person wins the prize. Hassan, take and rename, now nickname the rename, and watch pop culture cherry pick. Hassan. Pop culture is both everything and nothing all at once. Hassan. To challenge pop culture is to side with counterculture. It's a two-party mud fight. Allegiances decided by your favorite icy flavor. The system is childish. Hassan. So we, the indigenous, are labeled a spectacle, a media frenzy, pop culture's favorite drug. We are accused of ringleading a circus. And we are confused because there are so many double standards being juggled. We're sure this must be a meta circus. We're both the audience and the performer. Hassan. Epilogue. Hassan. We're here now. Hassan. In this liminal space. Hassan. Words as needle. Hassan. Breath as thread. Hassan. They dart into realities and stitch together lifetimes. Hassan, I welcome weary hearts with hawthorn boughs and water. Hassan, I lay a bed of flowers. Hassan, because I know flowers are timeless. Hassan. Thusly, they are old friends with good tidings. Hassan. I welcome you here before we both turn back outward. Hassan. As I'm sure you know, it's quite wearisome out there sometimes. Hassan. It can be cruel even. Hassan. Hassan. But here, let us name flowers. Hassan. So we are always anchored in this moment's peace. Hassan. This shared space. Hassan. This liminal corner aloft. Hassan. Spiritual soil where secrets pull like water. Hassan. Hassan, I offer you clematis, Hassan. It climbs trellises, Hassan, and blooms a holy purple, Hassan. The impossible kind of purple, Hassan. The kind of purple that can only exist in the chambers of the heart. Surging red and meat and blood made live and lovely by the thrum of blue electricity, Hassan. Thunderclap purple, a heartbeat. A moment of pure life, Hassan. Hassan, cherish the deep unseen work your body is doing, Hassan. When you see clematis, Hassan. Remember the strike of purple, Hassan. Each petal, Hassan, as pristine as the exquisite beat of your heart, Hassan. It seems only right to honor that poem by taking a breath afterward. I also want to take a moment. Oh boy, it's gonna make me cry. Julian's laughing at me. I just want to take a moment to really extend love and gratitude to Inham, to my husband. He just is such a wonder, and he's so supportive. And one of the things that we are able to offer each other is, in times of hardship, is just remembering, like, oh, just breathe, and we'll embrace and sort of like match breaths. And it just is some of the most pure love that I've experienced. And I can only pray that, everybody can find something that is that grounding and that is that beautiful. And so I just wanted to take that moment. And then now, this is as a lifelong trickster, I end up repeating a lot of patterns. And so even when I came up with the poems that I wanted to share with you all, I built it that same way that I was talking about, where I wanted to start off with this lovely moment of, commemorating my first trip to Vancouver, and just some fun and playful things, and then dive into some of the more, just some of the heavier material. And then now I would like to pivot. There's this piece that I want to share that one of my writing group members from the Kupsime, Beth, she always brings up this poem, and the first time she reminded me of it, I had completely forgotten that it even existed, but she mentioned it in conversation, and she was like, oh, there was this piece where you were talking about like the first word, and it just was so moving, so beautiful. And I was like, and it took me months to be able to page through I have a terrible filing system in my Google Drive. So if anybody has any hot tips, please, I am all ears. But so I paged through and was looking through notebooks and Google Drive and here and there all over. And finally I found the file. And hopefully it's the same poem that she was talking about. As I've, demonstrated through so much of my work, a lot of it, comes back to similar themes and whatnot. But this was a piece that I was able to submit this past summer. We created a chapbook to share with a group of other poets and artists down in Chiapas in Mexico. And so I was able to pull this piece out of the annals, dig it out and share it. And it was actually then translated into Spanish as well. And I'm just so moved by how much Beth loved this piece, and I love it too. And so it's untitled, but the through line, again with the repetition of Nez Perce language, the word is tots, and it just means good. And that actually it kind of unfolds within the poem. But so here it is. It's just this little short, lovely thing. So tots. I'll give you, or some of you, your first word, tots, pronounced like tater tots, and spelled like tack, as in tic-tac, but with what appears to be an apostrophe, but in actuality is a glottal stop, tots. Tots means good. We've adapted it to greetings. Tots mewi, good morning. Tots halach, good afternoon. Tots kulawit, good evening. Tots tsikatin, good night. Tots lahain, good day. We inquire how we're doing. Tots, and you? Tots. It's a good word to start with. It's a good first bite of a language so sumptuous and deep. A language not of romance, as romance can be folly, but rather a language of the blood, a language ripe with words for the most intricate experiences of humanhood. Yeah, so I will have to confirm with Beth if that's the piece she was talking about, now that I've given this big old preface about how, oh, Beth loves this poem. And the next piece is actually the other poem that I shared within that same chapbook I was talking about. And it's really brief, and it was a piece that I wrote in an effort to aspire to the level of poetry that one of our group members, Phil, has attained. He has such brilliance in brevity. The economy of language, oh my goodness, it's utterly devastating. It's hard to even really put words to, and it's weird. Most of what I've said about it is longer than a lot of the poems that he writes. They're just so jam-packed full of wonder. So this was me doing my best to really emulate that aura. And Phil has this beautiful, vast knowledge of Nez Perce language. So again, I'm aspiring to that as well. And so I was trying to utilize phrases that I remembered and trying to adapt the language to what seemed like how it would kind of I don't know, translate, I guess. So it's just this little piece. It's also untitled. Watisnim chechus, earthen green, my first memory. Mechsamnim, mountain air, my blood's first oxygenation. Sea-bound glacier water, singing life, self-same life my mother filled my veins with. I was born into the world, a world already inside of me. And I am, okay, anybody who knows me is probably gonna laugh. I am a very verbose person. I can talk for a while. And so to be able to write such a brief poem was quite a feat. I was very, very proud of myself for that. So yeah, I think it was a total of maybe 8 lines. There's 8 lines of poetry. That is remarkably short for me. And so this next piece is a slight departure, but it's sort of a quiet meditation. And it felt like a nice place to pivot into sort of a little bit of that wind down space. And the title is The Chorus is Stolid. And so I'll just define stolid because it's a word that sort of, it's almost like a comet for me. Like I know what it means and then it'll go out of orbit and I go, I don't remember what it means anymore. So stolid is an adjective and it means calm, dependable, and showing little emotion or animation. And I wrote this one night. It was a summer evening and there had been a lot of storms all day long. And I was living on this horse farm at the time. And so we had all the windows open because it had finally stopped raining. And all I could hear were just the bugs and the frogs, just they were so reverberant. And I couldn't sleep. And so I was just like, well, I might as well make the best of it and just sit and listen. And I started to hear more depth. I could locate where the sounds were coming from. And I actually identified that there was in fact a cricket in our closet. But then, yeah, I just was sort of washed over with this sort of marvel at this quiet moment. And so, yeah, so this is The Chorus is Stolid. The chorus is stolid. I expect flutters of nuance, delicate emotions, and exquisite pain laid bare for examination. But this chorus is stolid, where I might find laments and allusions of love. Instead, tonight, it is all voices rising together, a rich and tantalizing swell. There is no bark or boom, but rather a solemn persistence, a continuous assertion of togetherness, an indefatigable union. Each love sung is love of kin and kindred spirit. Their only lament that there isn't infinite time in which to be together, to sing of togetherness. But in these hours, we find ourselves, and in ourselves, our ancestors. This kinship is as old as breeze, as old as dunes, as old as probing roots spiraling through sand and loam, as old as sea swells lurching skyward, kissing clouds and whispering promise of tomorrow. Tonight, the chorus is stolid, and it eases the ache deep set in bones from eons of carrying all one must. As though their song itself was coiled in their DNA and now fatted on time and our wild excesses of panic, it unfurls. Tonight we are together and sing of togetherness. Tonight we lament only lack of time. Tonight our love is for our kin and kinship. Tonight we sing ourselves stronger, and tonight we are stalwart. And tonight we sing together. And actually, I would like to take just one small moment to just yet another shout out. While I was in college, my dear classmate, Michael Wasson, was working through the Nez Perce language classes. He was working on this story about katydid. And there's a Nez Perce language word, because it's a Nez Perce traditional story. There's a Nez Perce language word for she sings herself to death. And this, I remember hearing multiple conversations, both with Michael and then just kind of in the periphery, where he was talking about just the linguistic fascination with the word she sings herself to death, because it's a single word within Nez Perce language. And he is also he's a phenomenal poet. So please look up Michael Wasson and be similarly in awe of his work as I am. And he just was like unpacking the poetics of it and was just so enraptured with the story and the word that then when I was writing this piece, I could feel the sort of like Michaelness in it, and was just sort of marveling in this moment and kind of recalling that same, just because I was thinking so much about singing, the one line, tonight we sing ourselves stronger. I was sort of, again, emulating that wonder with language. And eventually one of my linguistic projects will be to see if I can construct my own Nez Perce language word that embodies tonight we sing ourselves stronger. So that's how I'm going to level up as a Nez Perce language speaker. Okay, and then let's see. Okay, so I have one final piece, and we're coming back to the coyote theme, right? Very trickster. I decided to end on this note of just sheer surreal playfulness. It was literally a dream that I had, and when I woke up, I started writing it just as almost like a journal entry, and then as it happens, it just turned into a poem as I was writing it. I always joke with people that I always have to be making something. So like I'm constantly, this is a wool knit sweater. It's very large. And so I'm just always like knitting, crocheting, weaving, beading. I'm always making something. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm writing either poems or plays or stories or what. I'm just always creating. And so this writing down this dream that I had, just turned into a poem, and I think it's hilarious, and I had forgotten about it until I was digging through all my files preparing for this event. And so without further ado, the sheer absurdity of it's just, I title things after the first line, and so it's just called In the Dream. So in the dream, the ray gun steals your personality and shoots it back at you. But if you shoot it at someone else, they change form entirely. But in the dream, the people morph into animalistic aliens, and I can steal back the personality and shoot it again. But I'm mesmerized by the flurry of color, blue and purple hair, yellow and green bodies, tails and fur and legs galloping, appearing infinite. I'm losing time to steal back the personality, the essence of each being. If I wait too long, the new being will forfeit its own essence. The original will be changed forever. And I can't stop waiting. I can't stop watching. Flee, scurry, leap, and lope. I can't bring myself to take away their reshaped existence. In the dream, I lay down the ray gun and I stare. I want to remember how their colors redistributed, dispersed, and spotted onto new bodies in a moment. And so, yes, that's my final piece. And of course, I included it also because it incorporates so much my love of color, and it's in a sort of a very rudimentary way, but it felt like the appropriate sort of landing point. So I just want to say one more time, thank you so much, everybody present and everybody joining us virtually, and then and all my ancestors who've got my back, and just and Julian. Let's really take a moment. Thank you, Julian and WSU, for having me. This has been such a phenomenal opportunity. And I just am so filled with joy and gratitude. And yeah, that concludes my reading. Yochkalo, as we say, that's all.
Eee. Tinapa, Haktawissa.
Pioticawas Nid. Okay, so now we'll begin with our Q&A. So I said, in my heart, I love you. Such a brilliant ayat, which is woman, Nimi Pu woman, Katialia, thank you, Sarah. So of course, we'll be taking questions from the audience and also questions from the class. If you have any questions, or you can save your questions for after the visiting writers, just you could just ask them, that's fine too. But the first question I would like to ask you is, so traditional understandings and concepts of culture, knowledge, take on a new meaning when spoken about from actual Indigenous people. So can you speak to how the power of story kind of works for you within your own poetry?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question.
You know it.
I'm always tapping back to just the lessons I've been taught, to the stories I've heard, whether it's, traditional stories or familial stories, or, even just like inside jokes I have with people. I'll always be tapping back to these small moments. And, I find that there's the most power in these bits of story. And so years ago, I set out, I felt kind of scattered in my storytelling abilities. When I first went to college for my bachelor's in creative writing, I imagined myself a novelist, in part because I am so very verbose. And as I went into my first fiction class, it became evident that, oh my gosh, like a story can't just be this waterfall of world building and describing characters and things like that. So eventually poetry drew me in because of the brevity, and trying to condense a story into such a small space is one of the first challenges that really helped me to focus my own storytelling ability. And then I found the stage. And so I was part of college theater, and then, my theater and performance career kind of grew from there. And as I went through the theater aspect, seeing such a large team of people come together to tell this story, whether it's a 10-minute play or which was my first like real venture on stage, was a 10-minute play, or whether it's a full-scale production, there are so many pieces and components and tasks and roles to tell this story. And that was where everything cracked open for me and started to make a lot more sense. And it calls to mind another group member, Angel Sabota, because she was my mentor for many years, working at the Nez Perce language program. And one of her sort of repeated lessons is that one of the manners is like total physical response. So in language instruction, wanting to engage the full body in order to be able to impart the knowledge better, because, just sitting still and memorizing a vocabulary list isn't really like fully learning. But if you're up and moving, you're playing a game, or you're, in a play or something, like that's what's really going to help the language live in you. And so by accessing, I had the immense privilege of being part of her master's thesis, which was an all Nimiputimpt, Nez Perce language production of the Nimipu origin story, Heart of the Monster. And being part of that creative team to specifically tell that story, oh my gosh, like what an amazing honor and privilege. And that was really one of the foundational elements that helped me to find my own voice and my own ability to tell story. Such a good question.
Coming straight to you from Meadowlark herself.
That's right, yeah. I played the role of Auntie Meadowlark.
And what an auntie. Okay, we have our first question from our virtual audience. And this question is from Leo. What is your process of choosing language for your works? What words do you use or not use? How do you choose which language to use for certain words?
Oh, I love this, especially because I am at present, I am being very obnoxious on Duolingo. I'm taking Spanish, French, Irish, and Korean lessons because I love language. And so I just love like trying to peel back the layers and understand how it all comes together. And so when I write, I take a very long time to consider like the weight of the language within the piece. And I started off being fairly conservative in the way in which I would utilize Nez Perce language, because it felt really personal at first. I felt like very timid. And so it took a long time to sort of like work a little bit more into each piece and then be brave enough to share it. And then actually tapping back once again to Michael Wasson, his poetry integrates so much Nez Perce language. And he took this approach where, you know, he wasn't serving up a translation for every single word, which is something that I felt like almost obligated to do for some weird reason. It was a rule that that I made up for myself somewhere. And so eventually I let go of that need, because there's this idea of like accessibility. And so sometimes I don't define the words that I'm using because because it feels like privileged knowledge. And so I don't want to be like snobby, like, well, if you know, you know. But it's more so a matter of like, you kind of have to earn access, right? You know, I'm not just going to serve everything up and unpack it all for every participant. Some of it is reserved for people who understand. And that happens a lot in all types of storytelling, because there's always like, you know, like referential things, pop culture things, you know. And I remember from my like Romanticism and Classicism class in college that there's like there's basically diss tracks, like poets going after each other. And if you read it in a contemporary setting, you're just like, I don't really know what this is. But if you have somebody who's done all of the research, they can kind of point to it and be like, oh, well, this is actually in reference to, you know, being snubbed at a party or whatever. I don't even know. And so I like to try to, something I was actually just recently telling Naitz, my mom, is that one of the first audiences that I have in mind for all of my work, especially in regards to Nez Perce language, one of the first audiences is my family. I want my family to have access. And so I think part of my need to define the words came from wanting my family to feel invited into this work and wanting my family to feel like they had a space within my creativity, so that it wasn't just like, I didn't want it to be going over their head. I didn't want it to feel exclusive. I didn't want it to feel like, well, if you know, you know. It was just, I wanted it to be a sort of love letter. And so now, as I've been working with the language within my work for many years, for several years, I've gotten a little more playful, and I've gotten a little more assertive even, like in my Hassan piece, just utilizing the repeated Hassan is, and actually within the poetry group I had mentioned, the fellowship, somebody had asked me the pointed question, like, is it a command? Is it symbolic of you breathing? Is it, you know, like what is it? What purpose is it serving? And I was like, exactly. It is somewhat of an instruction, but then in certain places within that poem, it also fits in as a piece, as like a continuation of the line. And so I like finding all of those little sort of trickstery ways to fold language in part two, to keep that language alive, even without definition. You know, I'm really glad to have moved away from the need to define every single phrase that I use. But I also still will sometimes defer to my elders and to my teachers in terms of things that, you know, that maybe I don't necessarily have access to yet. And so I am still sensitive to certain things maybe aren't topics for me to write about, or if they are, they're not necessarily topics for me to share that writing about if I'm still, you know, exploring and unfolding it. So that's such a beautiful question. Thank you so much for that. It's a complex process, and it took a lot of very deliberate thinking about it over the years to arrive at the space that I'm in. And I'm excited for, you know, how it keeps progressing. So yeah, thank you for asking that.
I love that. Poets as tricksters.
Yes.
That's a whole thing. Inspiration. Our second question comes from Stefan, which is a perfect kind of segue to this question as well. Do you feel drawn to write about Coyote more than others?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Hands down, yes. I'm very drawn to it. And I remember having a fairly lengthy conversation with still another Lacupsi May member, Kellen. We had this long conversation where I talked about, as I learned more about traditional Nez Perce stories, and I learned more about this central figure of Coyote, I was like, oh my God, not only do I identify with this, like my whole family just seems so like emblematic of exactly this, like all like, I mean, and I'm sure plenty of people can relate to the ways in which family and friends will tease each other and rib each other, and it's all, you know, based out of love. And so I carry that same essence, and I really love the versatility, because these Coyote stories are often, you know, in the 4-part poem that I read, there's the poem about he didn't know if he had started the wildfire. And then there's this sort of like open question, when he laps up the water, he tastes the soot ground into his fur. And so there's this subtle implication that maybe he started it, but then it's like still, it's all very nebulous. And I love, love, love things that are open to interpretation. I love that fluidity within storytelling. And I realized too that like a lot of my initial storytelling impulses, you know, before I went into college and into the creative writing program, so much of my storytelling was informed by TV. And so like the sort of moralizing of like, and then they all lived happily ever after, or, you know, like some kind of like summation, some kind of wrap up. And I had too much of that wound into the way I was thinking about how to tell a story. So finally coming across this Coyote figure, like, oh my gosh, there's no moralizing. There's like these small moments that sort of pivot the story. And I was like, that feels like a much more natural way for me to tell a story. So I love writing about Coyote. And even when his name isn't there, like he's definitely there for sure, of course.
I'm so stuck on that. Poets as tricksters. I'm just gonna nay it up. Just bring all the res right to you. So we in actually a few of my classes, we've been talking about how Ninipu, right, or Nez Perce stories and related oral literatures and cultural traditions and practices are not separated from theory or facts, and are therefore real sources of data as well as ways of being. Can you speak to how your stories and poetry connect you to your community and to your ancestors?
Oh, yes. So when I went to college, so I grew up in Pennsylvania. And so when I went to college, I moved to Idaho. And so in moving to Idaho, you know, it was this major shift. You know, it was the furthest I'd ever been away from my family. And it was just a whole different world. And it was very intimidating because I was unfamiliar with I didn't know what to expect. And like I said in the very beginning, I tend to be an anxious person. So there was a lot of worrying. But then when I got there, I found such a deep, rich community. I never could have dreamed what was waiting there for me. And so in that time, I did as much as I could to just steep myself in knowledge, in story, in community. And I was, connecting with as many opportunities as I could. And then after I graduated, pretty much right away, I spent the summer still in Idaho, and then I moved. My husband and I moved to Michigan for his master's program. And so it was a phenomenal opportunity for him. And so there was no way I wasn't going to go, but then I was leaving this rich new community and family that I had found. So, but the language was one of those through lines that like, I took it everywhere I went. Of course I did, because it was just in me. And then so many of the stories came with me as well. And so I just would try to hold on to that. And so then eventually it was probably 4 years after I graduated college and had moved away from Idaho. That was when the Tupelo 3030 opportunity came up. And so when I wrote that poem dedicated to Inam Sepa Hitamanawat, my teachers, Ka Inam Tatakas, my elders, that was actually the result of a dream. I had dreamed of them, and I had dreamed they had said just like one word to me that I could hear. Everything else was kind of the dream state where people are talking, but you can't figure out what they're saying. But then it was Bessie. I can't remember what the word was. I know I wrote it down somewhere. But I woke up and was just, oh my gosh. And then I wrote that poem because it brought me back to that place where I was so proud that I had this little bundle of knowledge of the language. And so I just felt compelled, I wanted to start weaving it in. And then back in 2020 was when the writing group I keep mentioning, Le Coupe Sime, Beth Piatot and Phil Cash invited this phenomenal group of people to come together. And through that, I've developed a deeper understanding of language and story, and have just it rekindled a community of sorts, even if it's digital. We're all in different spaces of the world, and but we would come together on Zoom, as we all were doing in 2020. But then it created this, another through line. And so it gave me even more motivation to want to keep folding those things into my work, because as I would, it was like growing a garden, and it was just so fruitful. And this idea would spawn this idea, remembering this word would spawn remembering these other words. So yes, it is just woven throughout because of how much beauty and love and joy I found within all of that. So much meaning too. And yeah, like I could talk for hours, I'm sure, about how poignant of an experience that was for me. But yeah, so I keep integrating it into my work because I also want to continue to encourage not just people, everybody who feels relation to this work, and especially that idea of community. One of the core tenets of the short plays that I've written is it's not just about being Nimipu. It's about being a person, and personhood is so tied to community. And so it's I'm trying to encourage everyone to seek out community, seek out that meaning, because there's such richness in that community. So, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
Richness in community.
I got so excited.
If I don't write things down, it's done.
Yeah.
Like my students can attest to this. I'll be just going off, and then someone will ask a question. I'll be like, what was I saying? Which leads us into our next question. Great segue here. Thank you. How do you approach inspiration gathering?
Oh my gosh. I was actually just at a poetry reading where one of the poets talked about, like, when you're in a groove of writing even if it's just like this one poem you're working on or something, if you're in a groove of creativity, suddenly you're walking down the street and you see a broken fire hydrant and you're like, oh my God, it's a poem. Oh my God, it's so metaphorical. And like, that can be such an obnoxious part of being an artist. I know that there's like endless comedic sort of like references and jokes and skits and stuff that will kind of parody that exact sentiment of like, like in, well, now I'm dating myself, but in American Beauty, where the guy is filming the plastic bag, flowing in the wind, and he's just like, but that's
so meta.
Yeah. But that's like, that's genuinely something that, it's a practice. It's definitely, I can't just talk about, it's divine inspiration. It just strikes me. No. It's absolutely a practice. It's a habit. And so, I know a lot of like wellness practitioners will talk about mantras and stuff, and like, what's the other word? But just things that you can say to yourself to lift yourself up or reset yourself. There's a lot of that too in managing anxiety, finding ways to ground yourself, finding ways to, sort of just building the habit of engaging in a certain way. And so creatively, sometimes I will almost force myself to look at a broken fire hydrant and be like, okay, what else can it be other than a broken fire hydrant? And so sometimes it's a little drudgerous, but other times, once it becomes a habit and a pattern, then like you can start off. Let me just tell you, like, if you're an artist, make bad art. I feel like there's a lot of people out there who talk about this, but like, make bad art. Like, just make something that's ridiculous. Write about a broken fire hydrant, write about gum on your shoe. Like, just write silliness, take that angry rant you got bottled up that you were screaming in the car and just go write it, scribble it, on a paper. Like, just make bad art, because eventually you might, there's a thing called a flow state. So if you just start, you can eventually kind of find what the actual, like, the actual sort of anchor point is for the creative idea. And so just make it a habit to just like, it's a literary workout, like, even when you're not in the mood, maybe just try to write a couple sentences. And so, I try to move myself in that direction, because then it gets easier over time. And there's still plenty of windows of time where maybe I'm disengaged creatively. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'll engage with something non-literary creatively for a while, but I always come back to it. And so, so make the bad art, like, make the mistakes, make the weird stuff, and you don't have to share it, but also, you can. That's that on inspiration.
Well, you're definitely an inspiration to me. I still remember the first time I met you was in a creative writing class, actually, at Lewis and Clark State College. I remember thinking, man, I shouldn't be here, because I had just transferred that semester from the medical humanities and about ready to go into the radiography program at Lewis and Clark State College. And then something happened, and I can't talk about it on screen, but I was like, F the medical profession. And I took this creative writing class that one of my teachers kind of coaxed me to taking. And I remember reading your stuff, and I'm like, wow, I should not be in this class. So you are definitely an inspiration to me. So we have time for one last question. How has being Native affected how people view your own writing as an artist?
Oh, wow. That is such a good question. And it calls to mind the quote that I don't even know who to attribute it to, but it's like, what other people think about me is none of my business. And so in a certain way, I don't have a full scope of how it might impact it. Although I will say that perception definitely shifts between, or is slightly altered, whether I'm using Nez Perce language or I'm just sort of, like the last two poems of mine have no Nez Perce language in them. And I feel like when I bring more of that to a particular venue, there's a slightly altered perception of me. And when I bring Nez Perce language, I feel like when I do incorporate more cultural elements, language elements, things like that, I actually think it helps to anchor who I am and give people a little fuller view of who I am, not just as an artist, but as a whole person. And actually the breath poem that I read has a little bit to do with some of the stereotypes involved in that, because then, you know, I'll naturally get approached with questions, people who are intending to be very supportive and who have all the best intentions, but who then might come off as being slightly misinformed. And I definitely have a lot of compassion for that, because I know that issues of race in general can be really fraught with a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of like sensitive like elements. And then particularly within, like on this continent, talking about indigeneity can be very, very complicated because, well, just because. And so it can kind of invite a little bit more, I don't want to say hardship, that's not the appropriate term, but it can invite a little bit more probing curiosity at times, which, you know, on one hand can be perfectly acceptable and, you know, and encouraged, but on another hand, there are times when it invites some of the more like positive stereotypes that are still, that, you know, even positive stereotypes still aren't okay. And so I'm trying to develop the language within myself to be able to have more frank discussions about things like that, to kindly and compassionately redirect somebody who might be saying or doing something that, even though it's well-intentioned, might not necessarily come across to me that way. And so that gets into issues of things like emotional labor and just general, like, sort of, I mean, also issues of consent, because I was telling the crew that I'm slated to work with for my second short play, I don't ever want to recreate trauma within my art. And so the breath poem particularly was hard for me because it does incorporate elements of intergenerational trauma, you know, ideas of colonization, ideas of, you know, of cultural appropriation, which, you know, is, you know, it can be anything from like a small gesture to a large, what am I trying to say, like event or idea. And so I don't want to recreate trauma, but I still want to be able to address it head on. And so I ideally, going into spaces, it won't be, I'm hoping that I can bring a strong, positive presence, like Indigenous presence, and I can only hope that that gives people a broader idea of what it means to be an Indigenous artist. And so I know what I hope about my presence as an Indigenous artist, but I don't always know how people interpret it. So yeah, that was a lovely question.
Well, Katia, Yao, Sarah, for your words, for your emotions, and for your story. We need more of you in academia. I don't want to be the only one crying all the time. Seriously, it's becoming a problem. Remember that when we tell our stories, we are cultivating and expressing ourselves and cultural values and experiential knowledge as a way to inform your thinking, and in various ways create a connection to each other and to our communities. Story work values narrative, the counter story. And when we tell our stories, we also integrate that experiential knowledge drawn from a shared history as people's ongoing struggles to transform a world through that very story. Service and reciprocity to our communities. Katsiao Yao Oikalo, thank you everyone for being with us here tonight. And remember, our next event hosted by the Visiting Writers Series is a virtual reading and Q&A with poet C. Marie Furman, Wednesday, April 5th at 6 p.m. Once again, Katsiao Yao, thank you for being with us here today. Bye, everybody.